Hey everyone, I'm John at Questmarker, and I want to explore today something the developers of Ubisoft's Far Cry series do really, really well. The opening.
The definition of insanity is doing the exact same fucking thing over and over again, expecting shit to change. That is crazy. The first time somebody told me that, I don't know, I thought they were bullshitting me, so I shot them. The thing is, okay, he was right. And then I started seeing it everywhere I looked, all these fucking pricks, everywhere I looked, doing the exact same fucking thing, over and over and over and over and over again, thinking, this time, it's gonna be different. No, please. This time, it's gonna be different. I'm sorry. I don't like the way you are looking at me. Okay? You have a fucking problem in your head. Do you think I'm bullshitting you? Do you think I'm lying? Fuck you!
From Far Cry 2 to Far Cry 5, the opening half an hour of these games have a lot of similarities from a narrative structure standpoint, which we might think is a downside for being so repetitive or static over so many games, but in actuality, these beginning segments are so freaking good at what they do. So to explain why these introductory bits are so good, I thought I would break them down into their components. The majority of these are in each of the Ubisoft's Far Cry series, and they're not always the same chronologically, but they're there. The travelogue is the piece of the opening that clearly demonstrates your character is a far cry from home. In Far Cry 2, it's your Jeep drive through the unnamed African country, or the UAC. In Far Cry 3, it's the video montage of Jason and his friends partying on Rook Island. It's the bus ride through the Curati Mountains. It's the helicopter ride into Hope County. The travelogue is an important narrative sequence because it lets the audience know we are undergoing a journey, and in each of these cases, we are going into a land of the unknown. The disruption is the moment of sudden danger or conflict, ripping us out from the action of traveling and putting the gamer immediately at some level of tension. In Far Cry 2, it's when we pass out from malaria. In Far Cry 3, it's when the montage is slowly pulled away from our eyes and it's revealed we've been watching this play out and that we are in fact prisoners. It's when the fight between the Golden Path and the Curati military erupts with gunshots. It's when the cultists of Joseph Seed fling their bodies at the helicopter. It puts sources of conflict at the forefront: malaria, pirates, civil war, fanatical cultists. We get an idea of the narrative as well as some of the encounters we're going to find ourselves in as we play the game. The opening cinematic, the beginning of these games, usually all pivots around the focal point that is the antagonist. Far Cry's 2 muted beginning compared to later titles does hinge all on the performance of the arms dealer Jackal. Far Cry 3 shows us Voss and a little bit of Hoyt, but mostly Voss, who is still so electric 8 years later. Honestly, the performance of Voss is just so captivating you don't want it to end. Far Cry 4 introduces the pink suit, autocratic king Pagan Min, enemy of the Golden Path. Far Cry 5 shows us the fanatical and zealous cult leader Joseph Seed, who controls his small army of devout worshippers. We are only the literal prisoner in Far Cry 3, but in the other 3 titles we are definitely detained. In Far Cry 2 we are victim to malaria, bedridden, and at the mercy of the Jackal. We've just seen Pagan Min assault a member of the Golden Path after he's eaten some of our mother's ashes, all over some kind of dinner in one of his fortress palaces. In Far Cry 5, the capture is a brief moment when the helicopter crashes, Joseph Seed seemingly unscathed as he takes the helicopter radio from us, and we are seemingly alone. We try to escape the motel in Pala in Far Cry 2 that is the epicenter of a reignited war between the Alliance for Popular Resistance and the United Front for Liberation and Labor. In Far Cry 3, we escape Voss's compound and burst into the jungle as we try to flee. We stumble into the Golden Path as we try to leave Pagan Min's compound, then a fight erupts, then we flee through the mountains, evading Curati military until we reach a broadcast tower. In Far Cry 5, we scramble away from the crash site, sprint through the woods, reach a small cabin, jump in a truck, and try to make our escape. At some point between the capture, antagonist, and the escape, the player is shown directly acts of violence, often extreme violence, that is either done to the protagonist or someone close to the protagonist. In the unnamed African country of Far Cry 2, the Jackal pulls a gun on us, threatens us, and then we're shot at in Pala by both sides of the civil conflict. We're shown Voss executing island indigenous, and then he later shoots and kills our older brother, Grant. Darpan is seemingly a friendly face on our travel, giving us cash to help in our bribery to get safely into the country. He is later stabbed, tortured, and killed at the hands of pagan men and his inner circle. Our helicopter crashes, and we witness our fellow deputies getting pulled away violently by the Eden cult as Joseph Seed sermonizes the need for radical violence, and then later on, the Marshal is later taken prisoner too. The opening of each game ends with us being rescued. In Far Cry 2, we are rescued by a lieutenant of one of the two factions. In 3, we are saved by Dennis, a Liberian and honorary member of the local Rakyat warrior tribe. In 4, we're saved by Sabal of the Golden Path. In 5, we're saved by Dutch, who's trying to resist the cult's activities and has this pretty sweet bunker. Those are the 7 narrative components, and they're each given greater or lesser weight in any of the main series titles of Ubisoft. Sometimes they are not the exact chronology that I've shown here, but they're all there, and when you combine them, they make for a fantastic opening to a video game for a few main reasons. The first is world building. The travelogue, disruption, capture, escape all do excellent jobs at showing the gamer the visual world and letting them get a feel for the danger around them. There's a lot of moving around in these openings, both via cutscene as well as player-controlled traversal. The escape through the jungles, the forest, or the mountains paints a picture of how we're going to be engaging with the environment for the rest of the game. We are shown explicitly the conflict that we're going to be a part of. We get a clear sense that the Kirati Golden Path conflict is one between the military and a guerrilla militia. We see Voss's murderous pirates victimizing the Rook Island indigenous. We see just how insane Seed soldiers are. The second narrative element or theme or motif that is now so iconic for this franchise is the introduction of the antagonist. One of the best ways of creating emotional drive in a player, or a reader, or an audience member is to show us the bad guy and let us have a relationship with them from the beginning of the story. There's a reason why Darth Vader is shown in the first 5 minutes of Star Wars. There's a reason why we're given a prologue in the Lord of the Rings films to see Sauron in action. Showing the audience the opposition to the hero at the beginning lets us ask why the bad guy is how they are throughout the game, rather than keeping us guessing about who the bad guy is. Why is a really bigger and better question to be asking when it comes to narrative, outside of mystery games and stuff. Since we meet Voss in the first 5 minutes, we start this intense and captivating relationship, even though Jason and Voss only share screen time for about 14 minutes throughout the entire game. He propels the player forward because at first he almost kind of treats us cordially, like a long-lost friend. He took fascination with us. He liked our cell phone. He then killed our brother and let us get a head start in our own escape for his own amusement. Anyone who's played Far Cry 3 knows that one of the big reasons to keep playing throughout this game is to just see Voss again. The same can be said for both the Jackal, Pagan Min, and Joseph Seed, one of the most exciting and intense and amazing narrative relationships that you can ever have in a story is between the protagonist and the antagonist. And the Far Cry games do a really good job of showing us that in the opening of each of the games.
Relax, Sheriff.
The third narrative reason, is the tension. This ties into the meta-narrative idea of each of these games. We always start as someone powerless in these situations who is in over their head. This makes each of these openings super tense. We're not equipped to deal with the Jackal, Voss, Pagan Min, or Seed respectively. Tension arises from an unknowing of what is going to happen next, from both the player and the character, and holy gee willikers. Are these games tense? The escape through Voss's compound, being held at gunpoint in the Kirati mountainside, walking through the hostile Eden's Gate, the checkpoint in the UAC, each of these are attempts, and pretty good ones too, at rooting the player in a position of uncertainty. Both when you meet Joseph Seed and when you're escorting him out of his church, I was getting mad Wind River vibes. with all sides telling each other to stand down. I really was waiting for one of your fellow deputies to say,
"Why are you flanking me?"
What are you talking about?
What the fuck do you think I'm talking about? You got us on three sides.
Get your hand off that weapon. This is private property.
World building, framing the conflict and plot, and gripping the player's emotions through tension. These are all narrative achievements the Far Cry series can boast when you play through the opening minutes of each of Ubisoft's mainline entries of this hugely influential and popular franchise. If you're looking to be a successful writer or creator of any kind of experience that has a strong story element, honestly, look to Far Cry for some inspiration. But we also have to be aware of some of its plights, because there are a final few things we need to talk about why Far Cry continues its long march of being a confusing series. Voss, I think, in my opinion, single-handedly exploded the series into the stratosphere of popularity. Far Cry 3 was a huge financial and critical success. Each game since then has tried to have antagonists like Voss, but Pagan Min came across too maniacal. Seed came off as too detached, almost boring. The constant search to find a new Voss is what leads Far Cry's cast of villains to be rehashed. I have a subsequent analysis for this point coming, but you are also always an outsider in Far Cry. It's part of the game's namesake for the experience to be a Far Cry, for the setting to be a Far Cry. This can lead to issues of both implicit and explicit colonial themes, often problematic ones, but we'll get more into that later. The biggest problem with the Far Cry opening is that they always consistently feel at odds with the rest of the game. These openings are tight, cinematic, atmospheric, stealth-driven thrillers. They are always about being subjugated to a greater conflict. They are always about a personal relationship with the villain. They're always about scrambling to just get to the next moment of safety. All of these feelings that you have in the first 30 minutes or hour of these games never resurfaces for the rest of the experience. I mean, literally, Pagan Min does not reappear until the final act of the game. Far Cry 4 is really about the Golden Path, yet you wouldn't get that from the opening of the game. Far Cry 3 is about being completely out of your element, about being a California boy in a jungle, about Voss. But Voss dies halfway through the game. All the horror that he brought is gone. And Far Cry 3 transforms into something else entirely. 5 is about rural power vacuums and unrest and religious fanaticism and about tension and about like that Taylor Sheridan kind of Wind River, like what is going on? But instead, you chuck beer cans from ATVs and drive around and do some hunting. Far Cry 2, though, is arguably the only Ubisoft Far Cry game where the opening minutes match tonally to the rest of the experience. For 3, 4, and 5, all of this is a problem between player expectation and tonal shifts. Ever watch episode 1 of a TV show and go, wow, that was really good, but by episode 5 you go, wow, this is totally not like episode 1 and not what I was wanting to see more of? Sometimes that can be intentional, sometimes it can be done well, but in writing this script, I was often reminded how visceral and raw and amazing the pilot of HBO's Watchmen series was, but for me, I felt like a lot of the episodes that came after never reached that level, never really met my expectations, except for one. Part of this was because the rest of the series never explored what I thought the pilot was setting up the show for. My expectations weren't met. Managing the tonal expectation of your audience is really important. It's what can pull a reader or a viewer or a gamer completely out of your story, or simultaneously completely immerse them. Far Cry's openings make you feel like you're about to embark on some kind of atmospheric thriller, filled with stealth and survival and chases and horrible violence. Instead, after the opening segment of these games, they just turn into open world theme parks. I'm mentioning all of this because, unsurprisingly, there is one game that we meme all the time, but it also has almost all of these narrative components of the Far Cry opening.
Hey, you. You're finally awake.
Yeah, Skyrim. But what sets Skyrim apart from games like Far Cry 3, 4, and 5 is that the rest of the game really does mirror a lot of what happens in Helgen. Helgen is not detached, gameplay-wise or thematically, from the rest of the game, whereas for Far Cry, it's like you're getting two different experiences. If you sit down to play Far Cry expecting that kind of open-world, chaotic, gun-blazing adventure, that's not what the opening hour sets up to be. The Far Cry opening is excellence though in video game design and storytelling if we just look at it in a vacuum. And honestly, go back and play through any of them and you'll still be impressed by how well these games set the stage. I wish though Far Cry experiences were dressed up in atmospheric, open-ish levels, something like Metro 2033, rather than the quintessential AAA open-world experience. Maybe one day Ubisoft will be bold and innovative again. Until then, the opening sequence of Far Cry is like an opening act that is better than the main performance, which is at odds with what we want as an audience, and a far cry from how games should be.
Hey! You fuck! Look me in the eye! You're my bitch! I rule this fucking kingdom. Shut the fuck up!